welcome to It's in the Cards. Thanks for joining me for another week. In between these snowstorms that are still coming, have not stopped for a lot of the area. Hope everybody's doing all right. As you know, I'm Misha. For those joining in for the first time tonight, welcome. You can get a hold of me at tarotbymisha.com, and you can get a hold of me on Facebook, Tarot by Misha, and you can find it in the cards. We have a Facebook page for the show as well to keep up to date each week with what's coming up on the upcoming shows. This week, we're going to be talking, besides tarot, we're going to be combining it with astrology, which I have not really done other than one show, and that was just basically astrology. And I have a fantastic guest joining me this evening, Anothony Louis. Yeah. Medication, sorry. Is joining me this evening. He's the author of several books, which includes Tarot Plain and Simple from Llewellyn, The Art of Forecasting Using Solar Returns, as well as Honorary Astrology Plain and Simple. Welcome, Anothony. How are you?
Okay. Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining me tonight. When you got started, did you get started with astrology first, or tarot, and that led you into the astrology?
No, I got started with astrology first, way back when I was about 10 years old. And then I met a number of astrologers who were into tarot, so from that, they introduced me, and several years later, I started studying the tarot.
Okay. That's what I thought, and that's for 10 years. Astrology is a lot involved with it.
I think it is, yeah.
For 10 years old, were you into science and studying the stars and things in science class that attracted you, or?
Actually, I was always interested in science and astronomy, and I had a telescope, and I would look at the sky at night. But then I had an experience that started me in astrology, which was my family. My father took us, I had 3 brothers. One Saturday we went to Rye Playland, which I don't know if you know this area. It's like an amusement park.
Okay.
I don't know if it still exists. And I remember there was a machine there, you put in a dime and it gave you your horoscope. So he put in a dime and got his horoscope. He didn't get mine. And it was this little scroll, and he was a Gemini. And on the way home, I read it in the back seat. And I couldn't understand how, it just described my father so accurately. And I thought, he must have rigged this machine, because how could the machine know so much about him? And it was so accurate. And I decided, well, I have to learn what this is about, because this is weird. No, there's this piece of paper he bought for 10 cents that described him perfectly. So that just fascinated me, and that's how I got started.
It is very fascinating. So many questions with it. Now, because I don't even know, for the chart, there's all different kinds of things on the graphs, the house planets, I believe, and I don't even know. I always wanted to get into it, but I wouldn't even know where to begin to start.
Well, if you're into tarot, it would be fairly easy to get into, because the symbolism is very similar. Right. And the basic idea is that the moment you come into the world, the planets are aligned in a certain way around your birthplace. And so the horoscope is just the math of the heavens centered on your birthplace at your moment of birth. And the theory is that that pattern of planets has has some relationship to who you are and what you do in life. It's very much like a tarot spread. The cards are spread in a certain way, and each position has a meaning. And so if you know the meaning of the planets and the meaning of the position, you put it together and make a story, very much like reading a tarot. It's very similar. And in fact, I think at least in the West, the symbols all have a common origin. So that if we think of, say, the planet Mars, Mars was in Greece, the god Ares, the god of war. And so when you think of Mars, you think of this very warlike, aggressive, masculine energy, which in tarot we would probably think of as kind of wands energy. Fiery wands, assertive, adventurous, outgoing.
Right.
So there is that correlation. And in fact, I think the most influential deck of the past century was the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And Waite's instructions to Pamela Coleman Smith, who painted the deck, he specifically said, use your knowledge of astrology to come up with the images on the cards. And that was the instruction. And she apparently was a fairly good astrologer. So she used the astrological symbolism to paint all her pip cards, which we use today. So basically, anyone who uses that deck, and it's probably the most commonly used deck and most copied deck, is automatically doing astrology because that was the inspiration for it.
So is that out of all, because there's so many decks to choose from, is that the deck?
Is that true for all decks? I don't think so. But certainly in the past 100 years or so, I think the decks that were inspired by the Golden Dawn and Crowley all had an astrological symbolism to them. That's very important. And the Waite-Smith deck, well, Waite was a member of the Golden Dawn, so he borrowed that symbolism and told Pamela Coleman Smith to use it. So, and those, I think, are the two most influential decks we've been using for the past 100 years, right?
Right.
I mean, the early decks were probably first painted in the Renaissance. That's where it originated. But the Renaissance was a period like the 1400s, 1500s. Astrology was part of the worldview at that time. Everybody knew about astrology. It was taught in universities. It was just accepted as part of the way the world is. And so the artists certainly used that imagery in their cards.
What, do you have a favorite deck? The Rider-Waite, or?
That's hard to say. I like to look at different decks. I always go back to the Rider-Waite and the Crowley Toth. I'm not sure, is that Toth, how you pronounce it, deck? Those are my two favorite decks.
Okay.
But I like a lot of other decks. I always experiment with various decks.
Now, when somebody's coming to you wanting an astrology reading,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people don't have their time of birth.
Right.
How important is the time of birth for an accurate astrology reading?
I think it's 100% important. I think, and the theory is, many people who are into astrology are into reincarnation, which you may not be into. But the theory is that we choose the time of birth so that we have the lifetime we need to learn the lessons we need this time around. And the time of birth really determines the whole structure of the horoscope chart. So, and there's 360 degrees in the wheel, so that you pick one of those degrees to be born under, and that's determined by the very moment you're born. And there's a reason you pick that degree and not one of the other 360. And that's shown by the exact time of birth. And so if you don't have a time of birth, you can sort of make a general chart and say some things generally, but it's hard to be as specific as if you pick the time, if you know the time, in other words.
Right. So with astrology, you're able to basically tell just about almost anything about the person, what their relationship and job, what anything.
Well, the chart will make a comment about almost anything, yes. Whether you're right or not is another question. but yeah, the way it works is, as you know, there are 12 signs of the zodiac.
Right. I'm a Libra.
It's a nice sign. I have Libra rising, so we have that in common. I'm a Virgo with Libra rising.
Okay.
So without knowing your time, I wouldn't know your rising sign. And then the moment of birth determines what are called the houses, which is another 12-fold division of the chart. And the signs are more, how to say this, more like general energies, but the houses are more specific areas of life. So when you say you're a Libra, it means your sun is in Libra. You were born when the sun was passing through Libra. The sun is a symbol of sort of your essential self, who you really are. So at heart, you're a Libra. Libras tend to be very balanced. They want harmony. They like beautiful things. And they're always looking for balance.
Yes.
And one
Which
theory
makes me indecisive.
Right, they can be indecisive, but they're always struggling to maintain this balance. They never quite achieve it. But they're always looking for it. But your sun can be in any of the 12 houses. So if your sun, say, is in your 10th house, which is the career house, you might go into a field where you're always balancing things, like you might be an architect or an artist or a mathematician or something that requires constantly adjusting relationships and bringing balance to something, a counselor. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint because it's a general theme, but there's what they call an archetypal energy there, that you're always seeking balance and harmony in some way, and you can do it in many different ways. You could be a dancer, a skater, whatever. But so the sun, if the house it's in, would determine the area of life you seek balance. If the sun, say, let's pick another house, the second house or the 8th house, those are houses that do money. Maybe you'd become an investment banker who knows how to judge the stock market and make a winning because of this sense of harmony and balance and knowing how things fit together. So that the house determines the sort of concrete, mundane area that you use something in. So you've got that overlay of 12 signs overlapping with 12 houses, and there's all those different combinations. And then there's all the planets, they mean something.
Right.
And again, it's very much like a sort of a complex tarot spread where each position means something and certain cards will come up, and then you need to interpret what does this card mean in this position in the spread, and how do the cards around it modify the meaning it has in that particular spread. Right. So it's very much like reading a horoscope.
Right. Now, let's look back at past history events.
Mm-hmm.
Does astrology work for that as well? Like 9/11 comes to mind. Was there something astrologically going on at the times that?
I think there was. There were very few people who predicted it in advance because who could even imagine such a thing in advance? But there's certainly, and there's actually an interesting book called Cosmos and Psyche by a man named Richard Tarnas, very, very well known in astrology, very smart guy. And he went back through history like thousands of years, and he points out planetary positions and planetary interactions at different points in history and the types of events that were occurring. And he shows this pattern that goes on.
Right. Somebody wanting to learn astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they start? How do they begin? Of course, you have your book.
See, I haven't written a beginner's book in astrology. Mine are more advanced topics.
Okay.
So, what would I recommend?
I was looking at the astrology plain and simple, but the title I thought
that's not plain and simple. It's a misnomer.
Okay.
That's a specialized branch of astrology.
Okay.
Beginner astrology. There are a number of good sites. I would start on the internet with. There's some very good sites that explain basic astrology. I would start there. I would start by getting a copy of my own birth chart. And if you know the time of birth, that's great. And then getting a basic book, like at a bookstore on Amazon or Barnes & Noble's. I'm not sure. There are a bunch of basic books that are pretty good. Off the top of my head, I can't think of one. And then there are a number of websites that are pretty good. And just seeing what the websites say about your chart and see if it makes sense to you. Maybe I should work on a beginner's book in astrology.
There you go. You do have a couple projects you're working on currently, don't you?
I always have dozens of projects. In fact, Llewellyn is publishing. I have a new book on tarot, but there's a long chapter in there on astrology, like a basic introduction.
You have a new release that's coming out?
Yeah, in April, I have a new book by Llewellyn is publishing called Tarot Beyond the Basics. Years ago, I wrote that book, Tarot Plain and Simple, which was a basic introduction.
Right.
And this is like the next step. And in that book, I look at the common symbolism between astrology and tarot and how they're interconnected and how the symbols really come from a common source. So.
And that's due out this coming April?
I think it's due out April 8th. That's the latest I've seen. So that's what, about 6 weeks away?
Doesn't seem like it with the weather we've been having here.
It should have spring-like weather then.
Hopefully the snow will be gone and melted by then.
Yeah. See, and in that book, I was trying to answer several questions. One was, how does tarot work? Those of us who read the cards, and if you do a good reading, you say, wow, that was quite impressive. I'm impressed. The client is impressed. But how is that possible that you pick these cards at random and they tell a meaningful story about somebody? That to me is intriguing. And so that's one of the questions I try to answer in the book, at least give my answer. Everyone has their own answer, I'm sure. And in the process of doing that, I look at the symbols that are on the cards and where many of them come from in history and in philosophy. And then it turns out a lot of the same symbols we see on the cards are common in both astrology and tarot. So I can give an example. Well, so a good example is the four elements. Like, tarot readers usually think of the four suits as the four elements: fire, water, air, earth. Well, astrologers divide the signs into four elements. Same four elements with the same meanings. And that idea of the four elements goes way back to the ancient Greeks, because that was the way they looked at the world. There are four basic elements that structure reality, and each element has a particular property. And so if you can understand that property, you know something about the world or nature or a person. So what is your
the art of forecasting using solar returns.
Okay, now that is a somewhat specialized astrology technique. And the idea there is that your birthday and your moment of birth is very important, because that's when you came into the world. And then every year, the sun returns, solar is the sun returns to the exact spot it occupied on your first birthday when you were born. You know, your birthday, your exact birth.
Right.
And so every year you do a chart for the exact moment that the sun returns to where it was when you were born. And of course, in a year's time, all the planets will have moved. You might have moved. And so you look at that chart and you compare it to the birth chart and you see what's different, what's the same, and then you make an interpretation about what the year ahead is likely to be like for you based on how the planets have moved since you were born.
Okay.
It's an old technique. It's a very interesting technique. And sometimes it's very revealing. We can really highlight major issues that are coming up in the year ahead.
That was going to be my next question to you, Anthony. How far ahead can you look into things using astrology?
As far as you want, if you have accurate tables, because the planets follow a pattern. There's a law to their motion. So if you have accurate tables, you can know hundreds of years. Not that you'll probably live that long. But you can know years and years in advance where the planets will be, and then you can look ahead and make a prediction.
How the planets and the time and place of birth and all of that, does that also determine like each individual's personality traits?
Well, I don't like the word determine. I don't think the planets determine us. I think the planets are symbols, very much like the cards are symbols that reflect something about us back to ourselves. So it's more like, I don't know, I can't think of a good example. But I wouldn't say the planets determine anything. They're just...
Well, I asked that because I had heard somebody was going to plan their birth when they were going to deliver, and they were using numerology to do that based on which date of the week the doctor wanted to do the delivery.
I see.
So that's where that question generated.
Okay. That's a branch of astrology called electional astrology, where you choose to do something in advance. And the idea there is that very much like a weather forecast, or the analogy I like is someone who's surfing, that if the surfer can predict where the wave is going to be at its height, he can get a good run out of it. So if there's a way to judge in advance where to be so you catch the right wave, you can have a good ride. And so the theory in astrology is that the planets reflect what's going on Earth, and if we can find a good moment in terms of the stars and choose to act at that moment, we kind of float on this good wave to a good outcome. And if we choose a bad moment, there's all these stories like somebody left their house, but they got delayed a minute, and then they missed the plane that crashed, so they didn't die. Well, that was a good moment to leave the house, right? It's that sort of thing. It isn't that the moment they left determined, like scientifically determined the outcome. It was they happened to pick the right time to choose to act, and they went with the flow, and the universe went with them in kind of a positive way. And some people, I think, are just born with a natural sense of good timing, and other people have a natural sense of bad timing. And so,
What more can you tell us with your upcoming book? And are you open to having the phone lines opened up? Anybody out
Oh,
there with their questions that would like to call in?
absolutely.
Okay, we will do that. Um, the book that's coming out in April.
Okay, so the book that's coming out in April, um, listen, I tried to do several things. One was to try to understand better what goes on in the mind of a tarot reader when they're doing a reading. And what inspired me to do that was many years ago, I read a book which I actually didn't understand. When I was first learning tarot, I think I got my first deck in the early 70s. And I came across this book by a guy who, I think it was Richard Roberts, called Tarot and You, or something like that, in which what he did was he was into Jungian psychology, and he studied mythology with Joseph Campbell, and so that was his approach. And he decided to do tarot readings for people. He worked in, I think, like a cult bookshop, a New Age bookshop, and he offered people readings. And in exchange for doing the reading, he got their permission to actually record. I think he used a tape recorder. He recorded the readings verbatim, and then he transcribed them, and he put them into a book so documenting what he actually said, what the client actually said, what was actually going on in the client's life, and then what he was thinking and why he said what he did at the moment. And then he did follow-ups, like what actually happened. So it was a very interesting way to present. I went back and reread it many years later and understood it better. But to me, that was an inspiration. Like, this guy was really serious. It wasn't just anecdotal reports. He said, this is what I said verbatim. This is how the client reacted. This is why I said it. This was the outcome. So it was a real earnest study of what goes on in a tarot reading. And I found that book fascinating. I tried to do that. So I tried doing it with several readings I was doing. So I didn't use a tape recorder, but after the reading, I sat down and wrote down as quickly and clearly as I could exactly what happened in sequence, and what the client said, what I said, what I was thinking, why I was thinking it, what the follow-up was, where I was right, where I was wrong. And I did that in an effort to really try to understand, at least when I do it, what goes on in my head, to make it conscious. And that was a fascinating process. I learned a lot about how I read the cards anyway. I hope that will be helpful to other people. And then I read a lot of the literature about people's explanations of why they think the cards work when they work. And it's very interesting to see all the different opinions people have.
Yeah.
And so I tried to summarize that and put it in perspective. And so that's part of the book. And there's all these different schools of reading. Some people are very systematic, and they have a clear system, and they use elemental dignities and
Right.
astrology, and other people are very intuitive, and they just sort of look at a card and say what they see without worrying about what does the Golden Dawn think of this.
Right.
And everyone has their own method. I think they all work. People choose their individual styles because it works for them. So I tried to look at the different styles and what they have in common, and the role intuition plays in reading the cards, because I think that's very important, at least for me. Even though I sort of know the standard meetings and I know a lot of the systems, what really strikes me is when I do a reading, often just a little detail will stand out that I never paid that much attention to before, and that little detail is kind of the key to the whole reading.
Right. That was going to be one of my questions to you. Since you're into astrology, along with the tarot when you're reading, do you feel that you follow like standard set meanings of the cards through the symbols and things, or do you find yourself an intuitive reader?
I do both. I think I start, because I'm always a little nervous when I start reading. Like, what if I say something stupid or it's totally wrong, and I totally misread what's going on. And then sometimes you get a card and you draw a blank. I don't know if that happens to you, but I think it happens to some people. And so I think I start with the standard meanings because they give me a framework to start with, but I don't insist that that's the meaning. Like, I think my two favorite spreads, I like a very brief 3-card spread. And then my other favorite spread is the Celtic Cross, with the 10 cards. I think that probably is my favorite spread because it gives a lot of information, and I find it very useful. And some people don't like it.
I don't. I don't do any standard spreads. Actually, each reading, I just personalize and go with whatever.
I'm a very free-form reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
See, I need structure.
Yeah. See, I get too boxed in, and I attempted the Celtic Cross. Everybody does, I think, because that's the most common one that you see, and I just ended up. Yeah, okay, well, there's, addiction going on here. Just, I couldn't get, I was more book.
Right. So that's
keyword, and there was no story because it was just, all right, this is for a specific thing. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I needed the free flow, where's it going, what direction, and just pull when needed.
See it? And that's wonderful, but I can't do that. I just get too overwhelmed with too much information.
Right.
So my style is to keep it as simple as possible. And even when I do the Celtic Cross, I will start with the first 2 cards, which form the cross. And I'll spend a lot of time, like, the first card that came up, out of the 78 cards, why is this one so important? Because I think that is the key to the whole reading, that first card. And I'll spend a lot of time thinking about it, talking with the client about it. Like, what is going on here? Why did this card come up? And then I do the second card, which crosses it, and I see that as something, in order for the first card to manifest in their life, something they need to pass through. And often that's a long discussion. I'm working with 2 cards, but to me it's just amazing how much information is in the 2 cards. And then I look at the rest of the spread, the Celtic Cross spread, as sort of amplifying that initial cross and clarifying it and bringing up the other issues. So, but I read very slowly. I like to spend a lot of time on one card and look at all the implications before I move on. And then every time I draw a new card, I go back and I ask myself, and sometimes out loud, well, why is this new card coming up here, and how does this relate to the initial card, and what is that telling me? So in that sense, it's kind of systematic, but it's also intuitive,
right.
Because I don't insist that it has a certain meaning.
Right. How often do you bring astrology into the readings? Is that a natural occurrence for you, since that's what you've always done?
That's interesting. I usually do one or the other, but not both.
Okay.
So, because they are different, so they have different approaches. The astrology is very mathematical, so you're looking at very precise movements of planets and when they align, and it's just a different way of, the symbolism is very similar, but it's kind of a different way of, in my mind, of thinking.
Right.
I find the tarot more free-form, the way you experience it, and the astrology more sort of systematic and mathematical. if that makes any sense.
Right, right. I guess what I was getting at with that question is justice is the Libra card, the scale.
Right.
Do you use that, the zodiac things in your readings and things like that, or?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. Certainly, it would depend on what the reading's about. Like knowing you have Sun in Libra, if justice came up, I would certainly think, I wonder if this has something to do with you as having Sun in Libra. But I would also think justice means justice independent of that. So that justice might be a special card for you if I was reading for you, and in a way that wouldn't be special for somebody else. Or, for instance, if you had a question about timing, let's say you had, let's make up a situation that you were waiting to hear about a decision that was going to affect your life. So justice would make sense there.
Right.
But you're wondering when you'd hear about the decision, and justice comes up, and I think with Libra, maybe it'll be October. I might think of it that way. And then look for other indications that maybe October is the month to be watching for. But it would really depend on what the question is, reading it. And probably if I want to do timing, I generally use astrology because I think it's much better for timing.
That's what I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
if there's timing questions involved.
Yeah, I don't find the cards that reliable for timing when I do it. I think some people do, but I find the astrology, I think this dry weather on my throat it's raspy too. The astrology I think is much better for timing. I've had some really uncanny timing experiences with astrology. Do you want to hear a timing experience? It's a little bit off tarot.
Yes.
But
yes,
this one sort of blew my mind. The son of a friend of mine called me up last April. It's almost a year ago now.
Right.
And he finished a master's degree and was looking. You okay?
Yeah, I'm trying to reach for a cough drop.
Yeah. No, I have my supply here too. I think it's the winter, the dryness, and
the heat and the dry air. Mm-hmm.
Right. I have my tea, hot tea, with some honey in it. So anyway, he finished a master's degree, and he could not find a job in his field, and he'd been looking for over a year. He heard about a job, but because of the economy, they just weren't hiring, and they said, maybe within the year we'll know something.
Right.
And he was living in New York City at the time, and he had an opportunity to move elsewhere. So he calls me and says, what should I do? Do you think this job will materialize in New York, or should I move to another city where I can probably find a job in my field? So I used the astrological techniques. I looked at his chart, and I did the Horary, which is answering questions like that. And the chart seemed to indicate, and I said to him, and I sent this in an email to him, so I have it in writing. I said, I studied your chart very carefully. I think you will get the job. It's now April. I don't think it will be till midsummer. And I think you'll hear about the job the second week in July. And you'll start at the end of July, beginning of August. And I gave him the reasons.
Right.
So he decided not to move out of New York City and I'm hoping I'm right. I'm thinking, what if I'm wrong and he gives up a job in another city and stays there and doesn't get this job? So he contacted me, I think it was July 11th or 12th, saying he just got a call from this job. They want him to come in for an interview. So I had said the second week in July I was around there. And then I had told him the most likely date he'd start the job was July 28th, because that was what it showed in the chart. He actually started July 29th because the 28th was a Sunday and he couldn't start. So to me I mean, it's not always that accurate, but I was impressed because I'd done this in April. I'd given it to him in writing. I'd given specific dates, and it worked out almost to the letter, like how the chart said it should.
Right.
So this one intrigues me about astrology. Why would looking at the stars tell you that? I mean, why should it work? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does work. And I've had enough experiences like that I'm convinced there's something to it.
I am getting some questions being
Sure.
messaged at me. And one of them is, how is astrology different from numerology? Both have numbers that they use, but one's focusing on the planets. But what's the difference there as far as what can be determined?
Okay. Well, numerology uses the symbolism of numbers, but it kind of exclusively does that. It mainly looks at the number symbolism and sometimes dates and names in the alphabet. And I'm not an expert on numerology, it's my understanding of it. And it stays there, it doesn't do much more than that. It sticks to that narrow area. Astrology and tarot both use the symbolism of numbers that numerology does. But astrology looks at a much bigger picture. Astrology is looking at the entire solar system and how it relates to your birthplace and time of birth, and how the movement of all the planets after birth relates back to you. So it's astrology using that symbolism, but it's using a lot more. It uses the symbolism of planets, the signs of the zodiac, the houses. So it's a much broader system in terms of symbols.
Right. Getting back to the timing thing, I know somebody that even determines when they're going to get something done medically based on astrology.
Right.
Surgeries and things like that, wanting it when the moon is positioned a certain way or the certain phase of the moon, things like that.
If people do that, I don't use it for medical reasons like that.
Right.
I think partly because it's very hard to predict in advance when you're going to have a medical problem, and if I'm really sick, I'm not going to wait a week to see the doctor. I'm going to go right away.
Right.
So I might be dead in a week.
And if surgery is needed, you have to go by schedule of the surgeon of the hospital.
Yeah, I guess for elective surgery, you might pick what looks like a good day astrologically, but very often people want to know that. See, you're not going to tell the surgeon, you don't cut me until 6:05 a.m.
Right.
The surgeon's not going to do that.
Right.
At least most wouldn't. And I haven't really tested those rules. See, astrology has hundreds and hundreds of rules that go back hundreds of thousands of years. And I don't like to do anything till I've tested it in practice, and I'm sure that it works. Because people make a lot of claims, and just because someone says it doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
So I'm not going to rely on some claim that's 500 years old that I've never tested myself and know that it works.
Exactly. Some more questions. Wanting to know when they say rising, planet rising.
What does that mean? Okay. Well, the horoscope is a map of the planets around your birthplace. And, the sky looks like it turns once every 24 hours. Actually, Earth is turning and the sky is standing still. But from us on Earth, it looks like, the sun appears to rise in the east, culminate at noon, and set in the west.
Right.
But it's really the Earth is turning, right? So the sun appears to rise, culminate, and set. Rise just means it's coming over the eastern horizon. So if you look east at the horizon, you'll see planets and stars, whatever, rising because the Earth is turning. No, that's like we say the sun rises.
Right.
Because every
so
morning.
When they say Libra rising, Taurus rising.
That means that at that moment, if you look east toward where the sun would rise, the sign Libra will be rising. Yeah. And then same with the moon. The moon rises, goes to a point in the sky and sets. So when the moon is coming over the eastern horizon, it's rising. Okay. That's all it means, coming up over the eastern horizon. And when it goes down in the west, it's setting.
It's like a map.
Yeah.
Of the sky.
Right. And the Earth turns once entirely every 24 hours. So everything makes a circle every 24 hours from the vantage point of us on Earth.
Now, why does, I understand, like, the date and the time and why that would matter. Why, what points does location matter? Because no matter where, if you're born in California, if you're born on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, granted you have the hour difference, the time difference, the 3-hour difference, but the planets are still in the position that they are.
Right, but the signs are not. So, for instance, if, let's say, it's 6 a.m. in New York City. I mean, where are you located?
I'm in Pennsylvania.
You're in Pennsylvania, so you're near me, okay. So it's 6 a.m. New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, where we live. The sun is just rising. We look out the window, we see the sun coming up.
Right.
Now, if you're in California, it's 3 in the morning, right? 3 hours difference. Yes. So it's the middle of the night. They have to wait 3 hours to see what we're seeing now. So their math is different.
Okay.
See?
Okay.
You know, if they drew a map of the sky, their sun in California wouldn't be just coming up over the horizon. It would be down somewhere below the Earth.
Right, okay.
Because they got to wait 3 more hours for it to come up and rise.
Right.
So from that point, the sun is occupying different positions relative to their location.
Okay. Okay. Now we have a question regarding horoscopes.
Okay.
They're very general.
Yeah, the ones in the newspaper.
Yes.
Yeah.
How is the horoscopes determined? How do they come into play since they're just general for each individual horoscope sign?
Okay, the ones in the newspaper are based simply on where your sun is, what sign your sun is when you were born. So you were born with the sun in Libra, but so were probably, I don't know, maybe 1 billion other people, 500 million other people. What's the population of the Earth? Right? Several billion people. So if you divide that by 12, that's the number of people on average born with the sun in Libra.
Right.
So it's got to be extremely general because you're describing maybe 500 million to 1 billion people. They can't all have the same thing happen to them that day. But there will be some general principle going on. If I can think of an example. So all I'm saying is that they cannot be as specific as looking at your individual birth chart with a particular time of birth, because that is very specific. If you're looking at a factor that you share with 1 billion other people, you're not going to get a very precise horoscope.
Right. So how do they determine it? Do they...
Oh, what they do is they...
Just someone, you know...
Well, give me 1 second to think. So you have the sun in Libra. And we're currently in the sign, we're in February, so we're in Aquarius, right? I think we're in Aquarius. So what the sun is now coming up in Aquarius. Aquarius is rising, which means Libra is where? I'm going to think. Opposite Aquarius is Leo, Virgo, Libra. So Libra is the ninth house. So right now, when the sun rises, your sun would be, instead of rising, would be ninth house near culmination. Ninth house has to do with foreign travel, foreign interests, philosophy, higher education. So if there was something going on in Libra, well, to each, I'm not explaining this very well.
That's okay.
Basically, what they're doing is there are 12 houses, each house means something. And so for Libra is its own first house for the sun. But Libra would be the second house for the sign that precedes it, which would be Virgo, right? Okay. So if I were a Virgo, Libra would mean my finances. Whereas if you're a Libra would mean your physical health. So it would have different meanings depending on when you were born. That's how they do it. They make this general statement based on a very general, but it's not very, it's in a very general sense, tells you something, but it's not very specific at all.
Right. So sometimes they apply, sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, that's for the other half of the Libras or whatever.
Yeah.
We are going to be running out of time.
Okay.
I knew that was going to happen.
Wow. It went by quickly.
It did. What, how can everybody get a hold of you?
I have a blog, which is, wordpress.tonylewis.com.
And they can find you on Facebook?
Yeah.
And your book is, they can be looking out come April for it.
April 8th it's due out, yeah. It's due for release April 8th, yeah.
Okay. What do you have that you have coming up after that one? And
well, I'm always working on different stuff. I was asked to give a talk on tarot at a conference in Texas called the Tarot Con, I think it's called. So in October, I'll be talking there. So I prepared that lecture. Because, I think they asked me to talk for 2 hours. I can't imagine talking for 2 hours, but so I have to think of something to say to a large group of people about the tarot that will keep their interest and not bore them. So that's my next big project, trying to think of saying something useful, meaningful. I don't like to rehash things that everyone else has said already.
Right.
So I like to try to say something that's moderately new or original, and not to abstract their way out there so that people can follow what I'm talking about.
Right. Now, if somebody wants to come to you and they want to get an astrology reading done, do they have to have, like with tarot, they have a specific question. Do they come to you getting a full astrology chart, specific questions? How do you do that for those that want to get a hold of you?
I should make clear that I'm actually not in the business of doing readings. I do readings, but I don't make a living at it.
Right.
So I do readings, but it's a lot of work, so I do them somewhat reluctantly because it's very, very time consuming. It's a lot of work.
Right.
And so I'll do them for certain people, for friends, family certainly, and certain other people, but I don't do them often.
Okay.
And I'm not really looking for a business in that sense.
Right. Okay. With that being said, I know that there's I wanted to ask how accurate, or I know there's like computer programs and things that people use that they type in the, are
How accurate are
those
the
accurate?
Some of them are pretty good, but I don't think there's any substitute for someone who's done it for a long time and has experience. Just like a tarot reading. A computer will give you, standard interpretations, but I think you're better off seeing a live reader who's experienced, because they will just tune into you and give you a better experience.
Right, more personal.
Right, more personal, probably more accurate.
Right.
A computer has limitations. It can only go by certain rules that it has to follow. It's not going to be intuitive. It will tell you the sort of textbook meanings, but it's not going to pick up the little nuances or the little subtle cues that you would pick up as a reader and say, oh, this is important. The computer just won't do that.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Okay, it was a pleasure.
And answered the questions that I had being typed to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm glad we were able to set you up for this evening.
So am I. I enjoyed it. And,
yes, very much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And I will be back next week. Get your questions ready, because it's going to be Q&A. You're going to have me, and nobody might try. I try to do that once a month, where I allow the phone calls and all to come in for readings. So that'll be next week. So see you then. Have a great night, everybody.